Guys, I think this is a crazy situation and want some validation that what I have done is not wrong. So, first off, I used to be married to my ex, Marco. He and I go way back. We were high school sweethearts. We stayed together even after I went off to college. Things seemed solid at first, but that's where our paths started to split. Marco didn't finish college. He said he couldn't keep up with the studies, so he decided to drop out. Instead of going back or trying something different, he chose to become a freelance graphic designer. His parents weren't too happy about that decision, and honestly, I think deep down he knew they were disappointed. Overall, he makes enough just to get by, but not much more. The problem is he spends a lot of time blaming others for his struggles. He'll say things like, other people are more talented, or that they just got lucky. But the truth is pretty clear. Those people studied hard, got their degrees, and built real skills in the field, while he tried to skip that step. It's like he wanted the rewards without putting in the same effort. Anyway, after high school, I went off to college and worked hard to build my future. Eventually, I landed a good job that I was proud of since Marco and I had been together for such a long time. Both our families started pushing us to take the next step. They thought we shouldn't waste any more time and should go ahead, get married so we could start a family. But here's the thing. I wasn't ready for that yet. I knew deep down that I needed time to grow in my career first. Starting a family right away just didn't feel right for me. And I wanted to focus on becoming stable in my professional life before taking on that kind of responsibility. Marco, on the other hand, reassured me over and over again. He promised that he would never pressure me into having children before I was ready. He told me I could take as much time as I needed and that he'd support me no matter what. At that point, I loved him and trusted his word, so I believed him. With that reassurance in mind, I said yes, and we ended up getting married. But things changed really fast after the wedding. It was almost like Marco flipped a switch. Just a week into our marriage, he suddenly started pushing for us to stop using condoms. He told me that if I happened to get pregnant, then that must be what God intended. I was shocked and immediately pushed back. I reminded him this was not what we had agreed on before getting married. We had talked about this many times, and he had promised me that I could wait until I felt ready, but instead of respecting that, he turned it around on me. He argued that I didn't really know what I wanted and that he and our families were right all along, that it was time for us to have children. He even started bringing up my biological clock, saying that my childbearing days were running out and that we shouldn't waste any more time. It felt like all the promises he had made before the wedding disappeared overnight. And suddenly I was being pressured into something I had made clear I wasn't ready for. I was shocked at his complete change of behavior, but refused to back down. I stood my ground and told him very clearly that I was not ready to have children, and that it didn't matter what anyone else, family, friends, or whoever had to say about it. This was my life, my body. I wasn't going to be pressured into something so huge when I knew I wasn't prepared. After that, he seemed to give up on the argument. He stopped pushing in that moment, and I let myself believe maybe he had finally understood me and would let the subject go. We kept using condoms like I insisted, but then something happened that completely shook me. One day I came home earlier than usual. As soon as I walked into the living room, I froze. There was Marco sitting on the couch with a safety pin in his hand, poking tiny holes into the condoms we kept. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My stomach dropped and I immediately freaked out. I yelled at him, demanding to know what on earth he thought he was doing. The whole thing felt disgusting and so unbelievably disrespectful. It wasn't just dishonest, it was a complete betrayal. At first he tried to apologize, but his excuse only made it worse. He told me he just wanted to be a father soon, and since I wasn't giving in, He thought this would speed up the process. Hearing those words made me feel sick. It was like he didn't see me as his wife or partner anymore, just as some tool to give him a child. I told him I felt completely repulsed by him, and that after what he had done, I couldn't trust him anymore. I told him to get out of my house immediately. Instead of leaving, he threw a fit. His voice got louder, his temper worse, and he started to get aggressive. I didn't back down, and that seemed to push him over the edge. Suddenly he slapped me hard, so hard that I fell to the floor. Everything went black for a few minutes, and I must have passed out. When I finally came back to, I saw him crouched near me, crying and begging for forgiveness, acting like he thought his tears would erase what just happened, but I wasn't about to let it slide. No amount of apologies could undo the violence or the betrayal, so I picked myself up and called the police on him. When the police arrived, things escalated even more. Marco refused to calm down or leave me alone. He actually tried to fight back against the officers. That was the last straw. They arrested him right there in front of me. This is a small town, so everyone eventually found out about what happened. My parents rushed over as soon as they heard. They didn't hesitate for a second. They stood by me, comforted me, and kept reminding me that I had done nothing wrong. Their support in that moment meant everything because I felt so shaken and broken. My ex's parents, on the other hand, had mixed feelings. His mom tried to see things from my side. She could tell I wasn't exaggerating about what had happened, but still, both she and her husband felt that I had gone a bit too far by calling the police. They said I should have called them instead and that they could have talked him down and calmed the situation. I had to explain to them that I didn't have the luxury of stopping to think it through in that moment. Marco was aggressive. I was scared for my safety, and calling the cops felt like the only safe option I had. His mom ended up apologizing to me over and over on his behalf. I could tell she meant it, and part of her probably felt powerless too, but no matter how much she said sorry, there wasn't anything she could do to fix what had already been broken between me and Marco. The damage was too deep. Later on, after Marco was released on bail, something that, ironically, my parents had helped arrange, he came straight over to confront me, but this time I wasn't alone. My parents were right there with me, standing by my side. I took a deep breath and faced him directly in front of my family. I told Marco that I had thought long and hard about everything that had happened, and I had made up my mind. I told him I didn't want anything to do with him anymore. I made it very clear that since he was so desperate to be a father right away, and I wasn't ready for that life, we had no future together. The only path forward was divorce. Of course, Marco didn't take my decision quietly. He tried to argue, to guilt me, and to pressure me into changing my mind, but this time I wasn't standing alone. My parents stepped in and made it absolutely clear that my decision was final. They told him he needed to pack his things and leave me alone. Even after that, the process wasn't easy. It dragged on for 5 exhausting months before he finally signed the divorce papers. Those months were grueling, filled with tension, delays, and more attempts from him to wear me down. But I stood firm. When it was all said and done, I didn't take a single penny from him, and because I agreed to drop the charges, something his parents begged me for again and again, he didn't dare ask me for alimony either. In the end, I walked away with nothing but my freedom, and honestly, that was all I wanted. After our divorce, Marco didn't waste any time. He started dating someone new almost immediately, and now he has 2 children with her. I had never talked to him, even once, after our divorce. His mother, on the other hand, has continued to keep in touch with me despite how badly things ended with Marco. She has known me practically my whole life, so I've never completely cut her off. But I have been very clear with her about one important boundary. She's not allowed to talk to me about Marco or his life. I don't want to know anything about him. And so far, she has respected that boundary. Yesterday, out of nowhere, I got a call from Marco's mom. She asked if I could come over because she needed my help. From the tone of her voice, it sounded urgent, like it was an emergency. Feeling concerned and wanting to help, I decided to go to her place, and when I arrived, I saw her packing a bag. She explained there was a grave family emergency and she needed my help looking after her grandchildren, who she was babysitting at the time. She said that Marco and his partner had left their children with her for a few hours while they went out on a day trip, and now this unexpected family emergency had come up. She begged me to babysit her grandchildren for a few hours. I told her honestly I didn't feel comfortable looking after Marco's children. It wasn't that I didn't care about them, but I didn't want to get involved in his family situation after everything that had happened. Then I asked her, what about her husband, the children's grandfather? Surely he could help. She told me he was out at a business meeting and couldn't come back home anytime soon. She sounded stressed and a little desperate, and then she started pleading with me. She said that she would only be gone for a few hours and that if it weren't truly an emergency, she wouldn't have called me at all. She kept insisting that I was the only person she could trust to look after her grandchildren. She made it sound like there was no one else to turn to and she really needed my help right now. After she continued pleading for a while, I finally let out a sigh and agreed to help. The moment I said yes, she hugged me quickly, thanked me over and over, and then rushed out of the house. Once she was gone, I took a deep breath, tried to settle into the task at hand. I made the kids some mac and cheese and let them watch whatever they wanted on the TV. Even doing something so simple felt strange. It was awkward just being around them, let alone taking care of them like a babysitter. I thought about calling Marco right then and there to explain the situation, but the idea made me uneasy. I hadn't spoken to him in such a long time. I didn't want to make things messy by telling him that his mom had roped me into babysitting. I decided it was better to handle it quietly myself. I told myself I could help her just this one last time. Deep down, I promised that after this, I would never pick up her calls again for situations like this. I didn't want to keep being pulled back into that part of their lives. I waited and waited for my ex-mother-in-law to come back home, keeping an eye on the clock. What was supposed to be just a couple of hours stretched on. And before I knew it, 2 hours had turned into 4, and she still hadn't returned. Worried and starting to feel frustrated, I called her multiple times, but she didn't answer any of my calls. My unease grew with every unanswered ring. Finally, I tried calling my ex-father-in-law, hoping he might know what was going on, but he didn't pick up either. By this point, I was starting to feel trapped, stuck with the children and no one available to explain what was happening. I was scrolling through social media trying to distract myself and pass the time while waiting, when I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. One of mine and Marco's mutual friends had shared a picture of Marco and his current partner getting married. The caption said they were getting married at that very moment and how happy my friend was for them. Suddenly everything clicked. Maybe that family emergency that my ex-mother-in-law had mentioned wasn't an emergency at all. Maybe this whole story was just an excuse so she could leave me stuck at her house babysitting her grandchildren for free, while she went off to Marco's wedding. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. I didn't care that Marco was getting married or moving on with his life. That was his choice. What I did care about was the fact that I had been tricked into doing unpaid work, taking care of his children while she ran off to enjoy the event. The frustration and betrayal boiled over. I couldn't believe I had been manipulated like this, made to serve someone else's convenience while pretending it was some urgent emergency. I immediately tried calling my ex-mother-in-law again, but once more she didn't pick up. At that point, I felt like I had no other choice. I had to call Marco himself. My last desperate attempt to make him aware of the situation, because I couldn't keep babysitting his children any longer. When he answered, the first thing he said was, before I could even get a word out, "Why are you calling me on my wedding day of all days?" His tone was pissed off. Before I could respond, his wife snatched the phone from him and shouted at me to F off, loud enough for me to hear. Both of them started laughing and then hung up. I felt a surge of anger. After that, I decided that enough was enough. I couldn't believe I had been manipulated and stuck in this situation for so long. Feeling frustrated and desperate, I called 911 and explained the whole situation to them. I told them that my ex-mother-in-law had left me alone with her grandchildren and she was nowhere to be found. Within about 10 minutes, officers arrived at my door. I explained everything to them again, making sure they understood that I had been manipulated into babysitting, and now my ex's family were not picking up my calls. The police tried to call Marco and his wife directly, but both of them didn't answer their phones. Since neither parent was responding, the authorities decided to involve Child Protective Services, CPS, to make sure the children are safe. After I gave my statement, I was told by CPS that I was no longer responsible for the children and that I was free to leave if I wanted to. A huge weight lifted off my shoulders and I walked away, finally relieved that I didn't have to deal with that chaos any longer. I honestly have no idea exactly what happened next or what actions the authorities took with my ex's family, but today, out of the blue, Marco called me. He was screaming over the phone, accusing me of having ruined everything. I could hear the anger and frustration in his voice. Turns out CPS had spoken with the children and investigated the situation. They have discovered a pattern of reckless behavior in Marco and his family. Because of this, CPS has decided that the children cannot be returned to them, believing that Marco and his household are not responsible enough to safely take care of the kids, at least until they go for some mandatory parenting classes. Now my ex and his entire family are blaming me for everything that happened. Marco called me, basically shouting at me, insisting I had no right to call the police, as they had come to confront him and his wife at their wedding venue and basically ruined their wedding day. He claimed that I should have called him first, as if I hadn't already tried to reach him. The truth is, I had tried calling his parents multiple times, explaining the situation and asking for help. I had also called him directly and no one answered. No one even bothered to pick up the phone or talk to me. I explained to him that calling the police wasn't some random decision. I had done everything I could to resolve the situation peacefully. Calling the authorities was my last resort because it was the only way to make sure the children were safe. I argued with Marco, telling him that his mother had absolutely no right to leave me alone with her grandchildren without being honest about what was really going on. I made it clear that it was unfair and manipulative to put me in that position. Marco informed me that originally his mother had planned to leave the children with a hired babysitter, but this babysitter had cancelled at the last minute. Because she trusted me, she decided to call me instead. Marco's mom never told Marco or his wife about this arrangement. She didn't want them to worry, so she basically lied to both me and Marco. I couldn't believe it. She had been dishonest with everyone involved and had put me in a very difficult, uncomfortable and unfair situation. Ex-mother-in-law basically had expected me to keep my mouth shut and do the babysitting for free. I made it very clear to Marco that I was completely done with his entire family after this, including his mother. I had only helped out of kindness, but she had clearly used me. Now I was being blamed for everything that happened. I told him firmly that he and his family needed to leave me alone. I was done being nice and being taken advantage of. I wasn't going to allow anyone to manipulate me or drag me into their problems anymore. In response, Marco called me petty. He accused me of ruining his wedding day and claimed that I was acting out of sheer jealousy. AITA for what happened? Update 1. I've been reading through your comments and messages and there are a few questions that keep coming up. I want to take the time to answer them properly so everyone understands exactly what happened and why I made the choices I did. Question. Aren't you worried about how this will affect your relationship with your ex-mother-in-law? I've been honest with her about my boundaries. I've helped her in the past, but this was the last straw. After this, I will not pick up calls that drag me into her family drama. I've made it clear that I don't want to be involved with Marco or his household anymore. Question. Why did you even agree to babysit in the first place? I honestly felt pressured by her tone. It sounded like a true emergency. I also didn't want to seem rude or unhelpful, and I trusted her because of our long history. At the time, I thought I was just helping for a few hours. I trusted his mom and thought it was genuine emergency. She sounded worried and stressed on the phone, so out of kindness I agreed. I never expected she would leave me there for hours while attending a wedding. Question. Why didn't you call Marco before calling the police? I did. I called his parents multiple times. I even called Marco himself. No one answered their phones. At that point, I had no way to contact them, and the children were left alone. Calling 911 was my last resort to make sure the kids were safe. Question. How did you feel when you found out Marco got married during this babysitting chaos? I honestly don't care much. I don't love him anymore. I did feel a bit shocked and angry though, mainly because I had been tricked into babysitting his children so his mother could attend. It was manipulative and unfair. If Marco's mum had been upfront with me, I don't think I would have had any issues. But she left me to look after her grandchildren for hours and refused to pick up any of my calls. Question. Why didn't you ever press charges on Marco for domestic violence? I chose not to press charges because I wanted to avoid dragging myself into a prolonged legal battle, and honestly, his parents repeatedly asked me to drop it. At the time, I also wanted to focus on moving on and protecting myself rather than getting caught up in court proceedings. Update 2. My ex-mother-in-law showed up at my house today completely unannounced. This was especially frustrating because I had already made it very clear to Marco that I didn't want anything to do with his family anymore and had asked him to make sure they left me alone. I refused to let her in the house right away. I stayed at the door and asked her calmly but firmly what she wanted. She immediately started apologizing, saying she was sorry for the way she had left me alone with her grandchildren that one day, but almost as soon as she apologized, she began trying to justify what she had done. She said she had no choice and explained that she thought I would never agree to babysit the children if I knew the real reason she was leaving them with me at the time. She went on to explain that she needed to be there for her son, Marco, on what she called his most important day. She said that she had no one else she could rely on to take care of her grandchildren at such short notice, and that she trusted me above anyone else. I could tell she was trying to make herself sound reasonable, but all I felt was anger and frustration. Her words didn't help me much. It wasn't just a mistake or an emergency. She had planned it in a way that manipulated me and put me in an uncomfortable and unfair position. Marco's mom admitted that yes, she had lied to me about the situation with the grandchildren, but in the very next sentence she started to gaslight me. She told me that because of what I had done, referring to calling the police and refusing to babysit the children's father, Marco and his current partner were now upset with her. Then she told me that I needed to try and fix things for her. It was clear she was attempting to twist the situation so that I would feel guilty, even though I had acted completely appropriately and only did what was necessary to ensure the safety of the children. I felt a mix of shock, frustration, and disbelief. Not only had she manipulated and lied to me, but now she was trying to make me feel responsible for her own mistakes. I looked at her and asked very calmly what she meant by that. She responded as if it were obvious. She said that the least I could do after everything that had happened was to call CPS and change my statement. She explained that I needed to admit to CPS that the only reason I had called them was out of anger and pettiness because Marco was getting married. According to her, I supposedly couldn't control my emotions, and therefore I had falsely painted Marco and his partner as unfit parents. She insisted that I needed to clarify to CPS that they were actually very competent parents and were fully capable of taking care of their children. I couldn't help but laugh at her face, partly out of disbelief and partly out of frustration. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her that if Marco and his wife were truly competent parents, CPS would have let the matter go. The fact that they hadn't clearly meant that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. She kept insisting that I needed to at least try talking to them, as if it were my responsibility to smooth things over. I shook my head firmly and made it clear that this was not my problem to worry about. I told her I was done being dragged into their family issues and that I wanted her to stop contacting me after this. I made it very, very clear to her that after this incident she needed to move on and stop thinking of me as someone she could ever depend on. I told her I would never help her out again, no matter the situation. At first she started to cry and continued to blame me, trying to guilt me into changing my mind. I didn't budge, and finally I told her that she needed to leave, and if she didn't go, I would call the police on her. That seemed to scare her, and she left. For the first time, I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I have finally set a firm boundary that no one can cross. I have made it clear to her that I will no longer be manipulated or used by her or anyone in that family. I am so done with this unnecessary nonsense drama in my life. Update 3. It's been about 4 months since my last update, and this one is going to be short. I just found out that my ex has been arrested for domestic violence. Apparently, he beat his new wife so badly that she was near death. From what I've learned, they had a fight over something and he decided to physically attack her. He even locked her up at some point, but somehow she managed to escape and call the police. My hands are actually shaking as I write this. I'm honestly shocked by what he has done. But at the same time, it's not entirely surprising, given his past behavior. I'm just grateful she was able to get away and get help in time. I keep thinking over and over again that this woman could have been me. I can't stop imagining how things might have turned out if I hadn't left him when I did. I feel so incredibly lucky that I got out of that situation before it could get this bad. It's terrifying to realize how close I might have been to experiencing something so dangerous. And it really reinforces for me that leaving when I did was the best decision I ever made for myself. For anyone wondering, Marco and his family have mostly kept their distance from me after our last interaction. Honestly, it's been a huge relief to finally feel some peace and know that I don't have to deal with their manipulation or lies anymore. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.